Alan, I am massively, massively concerned that the truth will not out in this case.
Well, it's rather worrying, isn't it, Patrick, that we've had this row today about whether and what's happening with the review. I mean, in my perspective, the review's been sitting on a shelf for some time. I gather it was finished last summer. It hasn't seen the light of day. We're not quite sure why it hasn't seen the light of day. Clearly, there's a row about its contents and what should and should not be published. And as you quite rightly pointed out, in the interest of not only freedom of expression, but I think in the interest of national security, we kind of need to know exactly the lie of the land and the state of affairs that exists with this very important document. So I'm hoping that the loggerheads that we've seen, different departments at will come to an end very soon, and we will see the full unredacted report out on the street so we can judge for ourselves what's in it.
Why is it that certain elements of the quotes-unquote Muslim community in this country, certain elements, seem to be protected, whereas other groups aren't? Unnecessarily so, as far as I can see. If people are doing things wrong, like, radicalising people, why shouldn't that get out there? Why should there be a fear of a backlash to that?
Well, there shouldn't be any fear of backlash to pointing out that people are radicalising other people and that they're extremists within certain communities. There wouldn't be a backlash if we pointed out, as you said earlier, far-right extremists. No person from a similar community would go, oh, no, we can't talk about far-right extremists. The reality is that the longer that we hide the facts from people at home, the longer that, of course, terrorist attacks occur. You highlighted some statistics earlier. Another one that we, of course, know is that year on year, the number of failed terrorist attacks continues from radical Muslims to dwarf those of the far right, yet we still don't hear much about that. If we don't hear that, people are going to start wondering why we're not hearing that and whether there is indeed a conspiracy, if you like, to keep the truth from coming out. It does nobody any good not to tell the truth about these issues, because people can find out the truth themselves and then understandably are concerned about why that truth has not been revealed to them.
I find it laughable that there is even a notion that if the British public at large found out the true extent of things like the grooming gang scandal or where extremism really lies in this country, that there would be some kind of monumental public physical uproar. We have had numerous terror attacks in this country, and we have not had massive, wide-scale, violent protests or demonstrations as a result. We've had vigils, we've had candles lit, we've had moments of silence. Why do you think the British public are being insulted like this? We can take the truth.
Well, we can take the truth and we should be getting the truth. But there is a whole strata of thought, I think, within the civil service and beyond that doesn't want to tell the truth because it doesn't fit in with the politically correct version of the truth, which is that only X or Y can be bad people in this country and not Z in this regard. And we've all seen that across the board in many different areas in this sort of setup. This is just another example of us being told a version of truth that we're supposed to accept when the actual truth is very different. But it doesn't do anyone any good not to tell the truth, Patrick, as I'm sure you realise, because people can work out the facts for themselves, and that creates a much worse situation than if you've been open and honest about the situation in the first place and allowed people to deal with that in the reasoned way, as you said, that we normally deal with these things.
I have got massive concerns about the rise of the far right, and I don't want to diminish that. I know I've focused here largely on Islamism, and I have focused largely on Islamist extremism, and I make no apology for that. However, I am concerned about the rise of the far right, and it is rising. But my other concern is that a supposed cover-up of the truth of Islamist extremism might actually lead to an increase in far-right activity.
Well, that might very well be the case, because some people will go, look, the state is hiding information from you, only we can solve the answer. And by the way, the response then of any upsurge in the far right is for radical Muslims to also go, look, we told you they hated us, they do hate us. These people are coming for us, you've got to join us instead. So the problem of ignoring this is that you then have a symbiotic relationship between the far right and radical Islam that then feeds off each other to continue to recruit to their causes. In reality, what we should be doing is supporting moderates everywhere, cutting off the extremists from the oxygen of publicity, but that requires us to be serious about where that extremism is coming from, whether it is from radical Islam or indeed the far right.
When it comes to Prevent as a body, as a thing, there have been criticisms of it being overzealous, both in terms of dealing with people who are suspected of being far right, and at one point that, as far as I'm aware, did involve a child who expressed support for UKIP. And there's also criticism of people being roped in who, frankly, have got nothing to do with the radical Islamist community, who maybe misspoke during a school production or something. I think one time the word arms was taken out of context when they were talking about what was around at their family home. And actually, is Prevent a little bit overzealous? We're hearing that 6,000 people a year are reported to them. Is that an exaggeration of the reality of extremism in this country, do you think?
Well, look, I think the reality of having this independent review is to discover exactly what is going wrong with Prevent. That's the whole point. I think we all know those cases which you've just pointed out, they appear on the surface at least to be completely ridiculous. At the same time, as we also know, people who went on to commit terrorist attacks refer to it and did nothing to stop those people ultimately. So clearly there are failings at all levels of Prevent, which we have to get to grips with. And that's why this report is so important for us to receive, because it's a careful and considered study. And in the interest, like I said earlier, of national security, we need to have this information before us so that we can judge accordingly how best to reform this programme to make everyone in this country a bit safer.
Yeah, and that exposure cannot be held back because of the risk of potentially offending some people who might react in a rather volatile fashion to it. I would suspect if they did react, hypothetically, of course, in a rather volatile fashion to this, that might explain exactly why they are in the interest of Prevent. Can I just ask you a question now? Obviously, you are heavily involved with the Henry Jackson Society, and I understand that the author of this particular independent report into Prevent was also a former member of the Henry Jackson Society. Have you spoken to William Shawcross at all? Is he a bit miffed about this whole situation?
Well, you are correct that he is a former trustee of the Henry Jackson Society, but it was a long time ago, and we certainly have not discussed the content of this review. It wouldn't be right for us to have done so. And if there's one thing William Shawcross says, it's always absolutely correct when it comes to these forms of issues. So I'm afraid I can't give you any secrets about what's actually in it. That's why I'm waiting to see what's in it myself.
Good stuff. Alan, look, thank you very much. Really appreciate you making the time for me on this show. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society.